Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Accessible eLearning Best Practices. My name is Dan Doggett with the Maryland Department of Disabilities, and today we're going to be talking about how we can build more inclusive, effective, and professional learning experiences for everyone. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. The Maryland Department of Disabilities holds monthly webinars on various topics related to digital accessibility and assistive technology. So today we're going to be taking a look at digital accessibility broadly and talk about some of the unique ways we as learning designers solve for and interact with it when we develop our trainings. Today, I'm going to be using Storyline 360 as a reference to show specific accessibility tips, but many of these will be useful for any platform that you use. Before we dive in, here are a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, we do have live captioning available for today's session. You can enable them via the Zoom meeting control toolbar. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel for future reference. We will send an email out to all registrants with the link once we have it up. And lastly, please feel free to add your comments or questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. I will do my best to address them throughout the session and hopefully leave some time at the end for them as well. Okay, so to begin our training, I want to start by establishing a key point. Uh, Accessibility is a fundamental part of our work as learning designers. It is not an optional add-on. It's something that must be integrated into every project from the beginning, rather than being treated as a final feature. And here's the great part. When you design for accessibility, you almost always improve the experience for everyone. The best analogy I can give is the example of curb cutouts on sidewalks. So these were originally accessibility infrastructure designed for people with physical disabilities, but they also improve the experience for many other people, including parents with strollers, delivery people with hand carts, and many others. So when it comes down to it, when we design inclusive digital training, we're not only benefiting people with disabilities, we are improving our training for everyone. So when we talk about accessibility, who are we actually designing for? It's actually a much broader group than most people think. We're designing for a spectrum of disabilities, which can be permanent, temporary, or even situational. Visually, this includes people who are blind and use screen readers, as well as those with low vision who might use magnifiers, or those who are colorblind. Auditory, we're designing for people who are deaf or hard of hearing and may rely on captions and transcripts. For motor disabilities, we're focused on learners who cannot use a mouse and may depend on entirely using a keyboard or other assistive technology to navigate. And last but not least, cognitive, we're designing for clarity and predictability to help people with dyslexia, ADHD, or memory challenges. So most digital accessibility laws are based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG. While the full guidelines are pretty comprehensive, they're built on four main core principles. And an easy way to remember them is the acronym POUR. So that's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So breaking that down, perceivable means, can users perceive all of the information? And this principle covers things like providing alternative text and captions for your trainings. For operable, for us, this applies to, can users interact with all of the components and navigations of our training? This means ensuring everything works with a keyboard and not just a mouse. For understandable, is this content and interface easy to understand? So this involves using clear language and creating predictable, consistent navigation in our courses. And last but not least, robust. can the content be reliably interpreted by various devices, browsers, or other assistive technology like screen readers? So here in Maryland, and actually all states within the United States, our required standard is the WCAG 2.1 AA standards. So this is the standard mandated for state and local governments by Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we're not going to dive too deep into the WCAG guidelines today, but at the end, I will provide some resources if you'd like to learn a little bit more. So I'm going to imagine that many of you might be somewhat, you know, somewhat familiar with what screen readers are, but it's crucial as us as designers and developers to understand exactly how they interact with the content that we create. So for those of you that don't know, screen readers are software to, read read the contents of your digital course or website aloud for someone who is blind or low vision. Now, screen readers don't actually see our beautifully designed slides or interactions. It can't perceive visual design elements. Instead, it reads and interprets the underlying code and structure that we've built into our content. So let's break down what exactly a screen reader can and cannot see. So a screen reader cannot perceive purely visual information such as color. So it won't announce when an answer is red or if a button is green or conveys some sort of meaning with the color. It won't see font styling. So it doesn't know if text is large, if it's bold or italicized for emphasis. It's not going to be aware or let the person know where that content is in the layout of the screen. So it won't announce something's in the top left corner or right-hand side. And last but not least, it will not be able to read text within an image or video. So let's talk about what it can perceive. What it can perceive is the semantic structure that we provide within the code of our training. So that's things like programmatic headings. So it will recognize and navigate properly through like your heading levels 1 through 4. It will perceive formatted lists. So when something is within a list, whether it's a numbered list or a bulleted list, it will announce that and it will provide the number of items within them. It will read alternative text if it's provided for an image. So that's the text, the alternative text to what you provide for an image. And it announces the purpose of buttons and links through their descriptive labels. So based on this, this is why we can't rely on visual formatting alone to convey information. So to ensure our content is accessible, we need to build things with meaning within its fundamental structure. Okay, so let's start by looking at some of the practical skills of building accessible e-learning courses. First, let's talk about the structure of our courses. And I'm talking at the slide level itself. When you are building your slides, make sure to use true headings and lists. This is extremely important. Don't just make your text big and bold for a title. Use the built-in heading styles within your authoring program, similar to Microsoft Word or Google, Google Docs. What this does is it creates a navigable outline that screen reader users can use to jump between sections, just like a sighted user would to quickly scan through a page. So let's talk about context now. Every meaningful image requires alt text, which is concise descriptive equivalence to what that image conveys. And similarly, link text needs to make sense on its own. So instead of just using a hyperlink that says click here within the structure of a sentence, use descriptive link text like download the Q3 report. That's the whole text link itself. Because oftentimes screen reader users will navigate just by going through links as well. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Storyline now, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we just discussed here in terms of our structure. Okay, so I have Storyline 360 up on my computer, and I have a slide on screen right now. It says common fruits in the US. A recent study found that these are the most common fruits eaten in the United States. And then it has a list of 4 fruits: apples, oranges, bananas, grapes. It has a picture of a bowl of fruit. And below that, it says click here, which is a hyperlink for the survey results. So let's take a look at how we can make this slide. Well, let's see where our issues might be and how we can make this slide more accessible. The first thing I'm going to take a look at is the heading for this slide. And if I click on this text box, I notice that up here in the text styles, it lists this as normal text. Now, visually, I know that this is the title of this slide because the text is larger. It's at the very top of my slide content, and it's centered. So I know visually that that is the case. However, we need to build that into the semantic structure. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this, and we're going to go up to normal text, and I'm going to change that from normal text to heading 1, because this is the title of my slide. And now that I've done that, you might notice that it has changed a little bit of the visual formatting. There's some presets for our headings. So after you've done that, you can change it back to how it was, or provide specific headings styles for your training as you go. But the most important part, though, is that this is listed as heading level 1. And so now a recent study, okay, that is normal text, that's fine. And so now if we look down at our apples, oranges, bananas, this is actually not a list. This is just formatted as 4 different words. And the reason I did this is because visually I said, hey, I want to use these star shapes, for the design of my course. I like the look of that. However, the problem here is this is not programmatically structured as a list. This is just 4 random words. So we need to use the list tool, get this out of the way, to be able to do that. Now, by doing that, when a screen reader gets to this section, it will say a list of 4 items. First item, apples. Second item, oranges. Third item, bananas. Fourth item, grapes. End of list. So that way, the screen reader user has some context there. Now, if you don't like the formatting of this, there are some things that you can do. So in Storyline, we do have some options for some other formatting styles. You could play with the space between your bullets. One thing I will say is never make space like this by using the Enter key, because this will break up your lists into 2 separate lists. However, if I really want to keep those stars there, what I will do is I will select those stars, and I will just have them go over my bullets like that. And so I still have so now I have the visual design that I want, but I still also have the programmatic list there. Okay, so let's take a look. The rest of this here, we've got this nice bowl of fruit. And for all important information, visual information, we want to provide alt text. Let's take a look at the alt text for this one. And then Storyline, I'm going to right click on the image and go to accessibility. And I could see here, the alt text here is fruitbowl1.jpg. So a lot of times when we, just download an image online and we use it for, put it in our training, it will it'll automatically choose, the file name. So let's be a little bit more descriptive about this. Let's see, a bowl of fruit, of various fruits on a table. And that's, I could probably, I could list those fruit out, but for this specific purpose, I think this will be just fine. And then the last thing that we have here, down here, it says click here for the survey results. So just that hyperlink text, click here, is not enough information. So I'm actually going to get rid of this, and I'm going to say 2026 US fruit survey. So if anyone just sees the link itself, that will let them know exactly what that is. I did say we had a comment in the chat, so let me go over here to what Matthew was saying. I know in Word you can define custom bullet images. That might be better since the screen reader won't pick up those decorative images. So yeah, Matthew, that's a good point. In Word, I don't know how that. I'm not sure if that's something that you have had an opportunity to then export into an authoring tool. But that's a good point for Microsoft Word. Certainly let me know if you've had experience doing that, um, porting that over. Okay, so we're going to keep moving on. And so let's talk about navigation. All of our courses need to be fully navigable by keyboard alone. And this is probably the most important part of what we do here. And this is an easy thing for you as learning designers to test. You don't need to be accessibility experts. Just unplug your mouse and try to get through your course with just using your keyboard elements. So using Tab or to go through your interactive elements and space bar or enter to select things. Every single element needs to be reachable and usable by just using the keyboard. So a lot of this depends on having a logical focus order within our training. So this is the path that the little selection box takes you when you press the tab key on your computer. It should move in a logical or predictable order, which is usually left to right, top to bottom, just like you would normally read. But that is also going to be contextual based on the design of your slide. And that focus indicator box needs to be clearly visible for the user. So if you can't see when something is selected, you can't interact with it. Okay, so I'm going to jump to another storyline slide for an example here. And on the screen here, I have a slide that has the heading says select each button to learn more about the process. And there are 4 buttons. The buttons are labeled step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. So there's a very logical order that those buttons need to go. So I'm going to preview the slide, and I'm going to use just my tab key to go through and select those buttons. So if I'm going to press tab once, and I'm highlighting step 1. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to press it again, tab. Okay, so now this is it's highlighting step 3. Then it is highlighting step 2. Then it's highlighting step 4. So this is a problem because since this is a step-by-step process, we want it to go step 1, 2, 3, 4. In Storyline and many authoring tools, it's going to assign that tab order based on the order in which things are added to the page. But we can fix this. So what I'm going to do in Storyline is I'm going to go on the top ribbon. We have a selection here called Focus Order. And if I open that up, a new window will pop up. And this has all of the elements on my slide, and it shows the order in which assistive technology will read through them. And so the first one there is button 1, button 3, button 2, button 4. So I'm going to move that button 2 up so that it goes in order of 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there's 2 other items here. We've got this sort of decorative rectangle that's behind. It's this light gray rectangle behind that. And then we also have the directions, that sort of heading. So for the heading, I'm going to have that at the very top. So assistive technology will read that first. And then this rectangle, um, so this doesn't have any alternative text for it, but I'm just going to delete this from my focus order. So that way, the only things that are being focused by assistive technology are the things that I want it to be focused on. So so if I test this out now, if I go back to my preview, and I can tab, so I've got step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. There we go. Okay, so I do see a comment in the chat. Let me see what we have here. So Matthew says, I agree so much about the keyboard-only navigation. I think many users could stand to benefit from learning how to use the computer just by using the keyboard as an input method. Keys and key combinations like shift or like tab, shift tab, using the escape key and the arrows, the enter key and space bar to activate on-screen elements would give the developer a better idea about how a blind or low vision user would interact with these courses and resources. Yes, very much agree with that, Matthew. This is something that I think this is the responsibility of all developers to do, whether you're working in e-learning or doing developing apps, websites. Keyboard navigation is a must. And I will say this, if you find it clunky and cumbersome as the developer, imagine the person who is trying to use it that does not know, the complete layout structure of that contents and how much more frustrating that will be for them as well. So yeah, having that sort of, insight is very important. Okay, we're going to move on. So let's talk more about interactive elements. So, and when I say interactive elements, I'm talking about the unique interactions that we put within our courses itself. So when we work within authoring tools like Storyline or Captivate, it's tempting to simply trust that native interactive features will be accessible. And I will tell you right now, that is not the case. It is your job as a learning designer to know which activities will and won't be accessible for keyboard or screen reader users. So take standard drag and drop interactions. These are very popular in e-learning. Currently in Storyline, this is a mouse-only experience. It lacks built-in keyboard support, and so you need to use a mouse to actually move those contents. So I'll just give you an example real quick. I built using the drag and drop activity, the stock interaction option within Storyline for a drag and drop activity. This activity, the instructions say, drag the item cards from the bottom and drop them in the correct state of matter bucket. And so there are 3 buckets. One says solid, another says liquid, another says gas. And then you have got the options at the bottom, which are oxygen, orange juice, ice cube, olive oil, and steam. If I try tabbing through this, and I'll let it load up as a preview, I cannot select any of these options. So all I get is the back to top. So, well, I'll go back. So everything that I'm trying to do, so as a mouse user, I can click on oxygen and I could put it in gas. Same thing, orange juice, I could move it to liquid. Currently in Storyline, this is not an accessible interaction. And this is something that all learning designers need to know because this is a very popular way to build engagement within your e-learning. I've seen a lot of people try lots of different custom JavaScript code to be able to make things clickable and selectable. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, the juice is kind of not worth the squeeze when it comes to things like this. So I avoid drag and drop interactions within my training because I know it's a priority for me to make those interactions accessible for keyboard users. Now, moving on, we have to distinguish between something that is, navigable or readable, and something that actually has meaningful access. So what I mean here is I have another interaction here. This is a hotspot interaction. And the way hotspot interactions work is usually you've got a background image and you need to find certain things and select certain things within that um, within that as the interaction. And so in this one, we've got a kitchen is our background image, and the directions say locate items in this kitchen that are safety risks. And so, okay, I see a puddle of water here. All right, so I'm using my mouse and I'm just clicking on those certain things. I'm seeing a toaster cable, a toaster wire within the sink. That looks very unsafe. Great. And I see a pot with the handle sticking out. So that might fall over. Okay. Simple interaction with the mouse. Now, this interaction is technically keyboard accessible. So I can tab through and it will select those items. Well, didn't do that. So, however, in this situation, it's just tabbing to the correct answers. So even if this is like, so it's missing the background context of that image. So if you're going to do hotspot activities like this, you need to provide more context for them to actually get some learning out of that. And so I recreated it as well, but this time I included other things in as hotspots here. So I included a towel on a counter. I included the spice rack. I included a knife that was on the cutting board. So these are things that you can tab through and select, and they can have alt text that accurately describes what they are. And it's up to the person to decide whether or not that something is dangerous or not. So if you're doing hotspot activities like this, make sure that you're also providing some incorrect answers, because if someone's tabbing through, it's going to be a slightly different learning experience for them. Crystal says, what are your thoughts and experiences with click to reveal cards and storyline? So in terms of general accessibility, so actually, you know what, Crystal, let's hold on to that because we're going to talk about slide layers a little bit later on. But generally, I think they're fine. There are ways to make them more accessible though, but we'll put a pin in that for the time period. Okay. So let's talk about design. And if you are familiar with building courses, you know that it's really best practice to build a template, build all of the tools that you're using at the very beginning of your process, whether it's your slide masters, whether it's your color palette, your design sheet, whatever you're doing. This is a super important time to really build accessibility into your design. So you want to use online color contrast checkers to make sure that your text and background colors have a consistent 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. There's nothing worse than building a button that you really like and putting it throughout your entire course and then realizing you have to go back and fix all of those buttons. So along with buttons, don't forget about your different states, like your hover states. You want to make sure that those are contrast compliant as well. So when I talk about our color contrast tools, let me move this up here. I use an extension called Accessible Color Picker. And there's like a million of these online. But you can take an eyedropper and test to make sure that your text and the background colors are compliant. And so since I am trying to reach AA compliance, which is 4.5 to 1, this is 4.9. So I am within my color contrast. I'm good to go with here. So along with color, again, it's really important we don't use it alone to provide meaning. So if something is correct, make sure that you announce something is correct versus just using green or red for incorrect. And then also, for multimedia, it's important. We always want to have synchronized captions and if possible, a full transcript as well. Okay, so let's do another demo and we're going to do a little button build. And so I have a button here, and this is another one where you don't want to don't want to assume that whatever so if I insert a button, and these are the stock colors that Storyline uses for their buttons. It's this white text on this bluish background. This actually is not contrast compliant. So if I put this here, and let's see, so I'm gonna just see what my hex colors are. So I'm just gonna copy that and put it in my background. And let's get that white, which I think is F. Okay, so in the stock buttons that you get from Storyline, there's not enough contrast there to reach a 2.1 compliance. So keep that in mind. Now, generally speaking, I think most people are not just going with the stock buttons. There is a little bit of people will design their own things, but keep that in mind that just because that's the automatic from your authoring tool, that's not always going to be the case. Okay, so I've got a button and let's build a hover state here because when a mouse goes over it, we want to indicate, hey, this is something that's clickable. So we're going to add a hover state. Okay, and so I have a rule when I do hover states. So typically, the standard is to go a little bit lighter in the color, when you hover over that button. However, I think it's depending on the color of the text itself. So if I have white text within my button, I'm going to make my hover state a little bit darker. That way, I know that it's not going to risk any contrast errors. And same thing in the other way. So if I have black text within my button, I'll make it a little bit lighter. So it actually makes it a little bit more contrastable. So I'm going to go ahead and change my button, and I'm just going to put it down here so it's a little bit darker. All right, so I've got my button, and if I hover over it, it makes it a little bit darker. And I know that this will be contrast compliant because when I tested my initial state, I made sure that it was. Okay. All right, let's move on. And let's talk about navigation. So when we create our training, it is important to make sure that the user is in control of their experience. You don't want to have your slides simply autoplay from slide to slide. Now, generally speaking, most learning designers will not want that to be the case anyway, because they don't want the whole idea, the whole reason why we have these rather than just watching videos is because there's an interactive component to it. But from an accessibility standpoint, for screen reader users or someone that uses a magnifier, it might take them a little bit longer to review the contents of the slide. So if they auto advance, they might be pushed forward before they're ready. And the same goes for people with cognitive disabilities. You want to give them the opportunity to understand and perceive all of the contents of the slide before they move on. So in Storyline, this is something that is automatically provided. This is the option for that. So, but just to show you where that is within the slide settings here or the slide properties, it says here slide advances by user. So they'll have to select the next button to be able to proceed. There is the option to have it select automatically. I would recommend against that specifically for the reasons I talked about. Okay, so now let's dive into a little bit more advanced skills and concept. And some of these are going to be more specific to Storyline 360. Um, okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is voiceover or audio narration. So audio narration, this can be, this can be somewhat of a like a stylistic idea with our training and how we provide our content. I think that audio can be a very powerful tool, but it can create some accessibility barriers when not implemented correctly. So here's a couple of things to think in mind, or to keep in mind. First, voiceover will interfere with screen readers. That, if you start a slide and someone using a screen reader has their screen reader on, they can cause some interference, and this might be slightly confusing. Now, generally speaking, someone using a screen reader can pause their screen reader so that they can listen, and so they're not hearing conflicting information. But know that there can be some interference there. You should also avoid, however, using audio that simply reads the on-screen text word for word. So this might seem helpful from an accessibility standpoint, but studies actually show that forcing users to both read and listen to the exact same content actually increases cognitive load, which is like the mental effort required to learn something. And so, this actually might make it harder for people to retain that information. So a more effective and accessible approach is to use like a split channel method. So sort of what I'm doing with my presentation today. In this model, like the audio narration delivers the primary detailed information, whereas the text on screen is not a full transcript. It's just used to summarize or emphasize key points in the audio. So, but keep in mind that if you are going to be using audio narration, you need to provide accurate synchronized captions for everything that is said within the audio narration. So let's look at some examples of what this, how this can look. So I have two slides here, and there's sort of two approaches. The first approach is no audio narration. And so this slide has all of the contents on the screen, and it's meant for the user to just read through it on their own. And it's fully screen reader readable, and there's no issues here. So it says, welcome aboard. This training module is structured into 3 key areas, and then it goes into those 3 key areas in some more detail. The second slide example I have says, welcome aboard. Today's training will cover, and then I just have bullets for those 3 key areas. So in the second slide, I'm actually going to have voiceover that reads all of this information, but just provides bullets to sort of summarize or keep in mind, provide some context of what's done here. This is the approach I would recommend if you are doing voiceover, just because it will be the most accessible for all of your users. Okay, so let's keep going. So layers and pop-ups. Someone was talking about click and reveal cards. I would consider those to be in this category of layers and pop-ups. And these are a great way to increase engagement. They keep the people interacting with your content. It also limits the amount of text on screen at one time. But you have to keep in mind there are some accessibility traps here. So, and this is because screen readers don't automatically announce when a new layer or pop-up appears on the screen. So a sighted user can see the animation of a change, but a screen reader user is going to be left on that base layer with no information that something new has happened. So in web development, there are ways in the code using ARIA to announce to screen reader users when something new has come on the screen. One easy way that I do this is to provide a subtle notification sound. So like a soft whoosh or a pop that plays when a layer appears. And so this is an easy way to add a non-visual cue that something has changed. And so let me just show you what that looks like. Where is it? Okay. So on the screen here, oh, you know what? Let me see. Did I share my sound? I don't think I shared my sound. Let me just see if I can fix that real quick. Apologies. Share sound. Okay, so on the screen it says, click each button to learn more, and each button is assigned to a different layer. So how this looks within the training itself when I preview it. So you click on the first button. Oh, you know what? That didn't hear. Hold on. I think I muted that sound. Yeah, let me try that again. So if you heard it, there's the animation has the layer, sort of popping up from the bottom, and I added a nice little whoosh sound to sort of, let you know that happened. So here it is again. It didn't do it the second time. So there it is. This is, that's obviously not a, it's not the most accessible way of doing this. I'm sure, there are other ways we could incorporate some sound for that. But, this is sort of a subtle way to do that. And I think it sort of, this is one of those things I think actually makes the experience better for everyone. So another thing here is you want to make sure that your layers, you want to be careful with the tab order in your layers here. So if let me try this now with just using my tab keys. So I can tab through button 1, 2, 3. So let's start at button 1. Okay, I've opened it up. So I'm going to go back now. And so what happened is I didn't actually select the back button. I selected button number 2 that's underneath this layer. And so this is an issue because those buttons, we don't want people to be able to click those buttons within these layers. So what you can do is within each specific layer, if I right click on them and go to properties, here I can prevent the user from clicking on the other layers. So if I do that for all 3 of my layers, now this is going to work much more how I'd like it to. And this is one of those things that if you're not testing with your keyboard, you might not see that this is a barrier, but this can be a big barrier. Okay. So in terms of, using click and reveal, accordion style, things like this, these are sort of a cornerstone in e-learning. I think they're fine. I think just you do need to, provide a little bit of extra care as you go through it. So another advanced technique that I like to use involves like using different states to provide information to users. So we can change the design of a button to let users know visually once a button or a layer has been visited. And we could do that either by graying out the button or, providing a check mark or an icon to let you know that you've already gone to that section. But we need to provide that same feedback to a screen reader user. And we can do this by actually changing the alt text based on the object state. So let me show you what I'm talking about here now. So in this example, this is sort of the same slide, but watch what happens when once I've clicked on button 1. So now that I've clicked on it, now I've got this nice check box or this check mark at the top of my button that lets me know I've already selected that. However, I need to also, that's a visual cue. So we need to be able to announce that clearly to our screen reader. So the first thing I'm going to do is, so if I select my button and go to my states, so I've got my normal state, and then my visited state has that check mark button. So I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to edit that visited state, and I'm going to edit the alt text. And it's just going to edit the alt text for that visited state. And so what I'm going to do is we still have our alt text from the normal state, and I'm just going to add visited. So that now, when someone goes to that button again with their screen reader, it will announce to them, hey, you've already gone to this. The next thing you need to make sure you do is remove the alt text from the checkbox itself, because you don't want them to, that's just going to be additional information that they don't need to hear. Because we've already updated the button so that when it gets to it, it says button 1 visited. And again, that's only going to be within the visited state. So this is something that will, be much more clear for your screen reader users as they're going through your content. Okay, so let's keep going because I want to make sure we've got enough time to go through everything. So as learning designers, it's our responsibility to stay up to date with the latest updates from our authoring tools. So, your major vendors roll out accessibility patches or, new enhancements, sometimes on a monthly or weekly basis. I know I have a storyline update that I need to do. I saw I had that today. So if your development team or if you're not actively monitoring these release cycles, you're likely missing out on some important updates that could make your trainings more accessible. So for concrete examples, let's look at some of the updates that Articulate has rolled out just within the past few months. So the first thing that they have recently introduced is the timeline accessibility toggle. So if you see here in my timeline, we have these accessibility icons for each of my elements on my slide, and these simply turn off, remove them from assistive technology. So, for instance, button number 3. If I unselect that, it will not read the alt text for that button itself. And so this is a really, really important tool. If you have a lot of shapes on a slide and you need to quickly mark things so that screen readers don't read them, so they're just decorative images, that's a really easy, quick way to do it. Another thing, speaking of alt text, so if you have the storyline AI option, you can generate alt text with their AI assistant, and this can be very helpful if it's just a way for you to not have to think about this, and it will sort of generate it for you. I will say, because it is AI, always check, make sure that it makes sense within the context of the slide that you're building or the interaction. Make sure that makes sense, but that is a nice time saver. And finally, they've also done a lot with the interactions in Rise. So I know in Rise 360, one of the common interactions that I would see in my testing that I would have to, tell developers to go back and change was the sorting interaction. The sorting interaction up until just a few months ago was inaccessible. So it didn't announce information to keyboard or to screen reader users, and you weren't able to select the different selections based with just the keyboard alone. They have since fixed that. So these are just things within the last couple of months. So it's really great to see these improvements. I will, give Articulate credit here. They've been making a lot of enhancements there. So check with your companies. Make sure that everyone, if I know in Storyline's example, they have an accessibility page where they talk about certain interactions that are or not accessible, and where their future plans are for development. Okay, so let's talk about so now you know everything you need to do. You've put everything in. Um, Now you have to test your work. And so for this, I recommend a three-step process. So if you are using Storyline, the first thing that I would recommend is making sure before you publish to use the built-in Storyline accessibility checker. So this is your first pass to make sure, hey, do I have all of my alt text? Did I put headings in on this slide? Do I have titles here? It is uh, this is sort of the first pass. How do I, make sure that everything is accessible? So that is always, for automated testers like this is just going to check if something is there or missing. So it's not going to check necessarily to see if something works. So the next thing you want to do is unplug your mouse and test with your keyboard, because your accessibility checker is not going to test for that. So can you get through the entire course with just using your tab, spacebar, and enter keys? So this is the most important part. And lastly, if you can, do a screen reader spot check. So you don't need to be an expert in assistive technology, but if you can, turn on a screen reader like NVDA and listen to a couple of key slides. Does it make sense to you? And NVDA is an open source screen reader that you can get. Uh, and you can use just either the tab keys or the down arrows to sort of navigate through it. So, with that, that's going to solve a lot of the accessibility issues that you might have within your courses themselves. So the last thing that I'm going to provide for you here. So this is this is a resource page. I'm going to send the slides out to everyone once I have the recording ready. So, to wrap up, our goal here is we want to be proactive in the design of our courses and not reactive to try to fix things at the end. So if you're thinking about these principles from the start, you're going to build things much more efficiently, and you're going to build better courses as well. So the last thing I have here are some resources. The first thing I have is this will link you to the Maryland eLearning accessibility guidelines. So those were developed by my office and sort of go over a lot of the things that we talked about today. The next thing I have is the Articulate 360 accessibility features. So this is their accessibility page where they talk about interactions and what to use and what not to use if you want to build an accessible course. The next thing I have here is the Maryland IT Accessibility Initiative website. So that is my department's website here in the state of Maryland. We have lots of resources outside of e-learning on other, building accessible, document accessibility, lots of other helpful information there. And last but not least, I've also linked the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines if you'd like to have a little bit of a deep dive there. So we do have a couple more minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we have any questions. Let's see. So let me see if I can see the Q&A here. Okay, so no questions in the Q&A, but we do have a little bit of time here. So Isaac says, do you find that it's hard to get buy-in from people? I know my team often is used to doing things a certain way. For example, voiceovers just reading the slides, or they only want to make changes that are explicitly required for a situation. How do you try to get people on board with changing the way we do things? So I will say this as someone that works in state government. Um, so we've had a big culture shift within the last year in terms of the Title II rulemaking. In terms of accessibility, people are definitely taking it a lot more seriously. And they also, as you know, people have sent things for us for testing, realizing that, hey, I have to make a lot of big changes to make something accessible. It might be easier if I do this from the beginning. So that buy-in has been very, from that respect, has been helpful. I would also say, look at your engagement with your, if you have data on, how people are doing with their courses, if you can build something that, isn't reading everything on the text, or if you can have some data to provide in terms of how people are doing. If you're building better courses, are people doing better, with the material that you're learning? That's always a challenge with e-learning, and then, learning and development in general, but that can also help with buy-in. But for me, the biggest thing is, the accessibility component and making sure that people, within state government, that's been helpful to get across. So I think it depends on your organization, and it certainly needs to come from leadership. I think that's the most important part. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm leaving my email address at the bottom of the slide here. It's dan.doggett@maryland.gov. If you have any other questions about e-learning or accessibility in general, be happy to discuss that with you. And like I said, I will be providing these slides and the recording to all registered users once we have them up on YouTube. So thanks again, and I hope to see you all next time.